Hello folks, welcome back to the W Club Decanted. I'm delighted to be joined on this episode by George Campbell, Distillery Manager at Laphroaig. We discussed life on Islay, Laphroaig's place in the pantheon of world whisky, and the new limited edition release Elements 3.0, now available at the whisky shop. Enjoy the show. Marvellous. Well, George, thank you so much for joining us. We were just discussing how gorgeous a day it is there for you on Islay. You're coming to us live from the distillery, I believe.
Yep, that's correct. Look, and it's quite something. We've got constant sunshine this week, possibly a little bit more next week, and weirdly enough, I've actually got more of a tan on Islay here than I had living in Australia, because I was in such a habit of putting on sun cream for so long there that it's caught me out this time.
Yeah, and you're from there originally, aren't you? From Islay?
Yeah. I'm from Islay. I grew up in a couple of places really, but Bowmore, Portellan, and a house in between. Went to Bowmore Primary School, Bowmore High School, and yeah, I was here until I was 18, and I left to study at Glasgow Uni back then, and even then I was back and forward for 4 years.
Yeah, because you were I suppose it was kind of naturally where we tend to start on these podcasts in terms of people's sort of careers to date and how their journey in whisky has evolved. Because you were, after your time in uni, you were in charge of the visitor centre or something along those lines in Laphroaig, I believe.
No, I wasn't in charge. I had my first year away from Islay. I was studying maths and stats at Glasgow Uni, and I got a job as a tour guide at Laphroaig in between semesters. So every summer, a couple of times in the winter, I was back doing tours. So that was really my first step into whisky, and to be honest, the first place and moment that I realised I wanted to work in something different than numbers.
Mm-hmm. And after that, then you were at a few different brands, I believe.
Yeah, I was. Funnily enough, it was a conversation with a chap who was working on Islay at the time for Diageo, and he made me aware of different career paths in whisky. And funnily enough, they had an opportunity for trainee distillery manager coming up, and one thing led to another. After a long, lengthy application process, I landed it and headed up the A9, and 3 years of an effective traineeship commenced. I worked at Cardew Distillery, Nakando, Cragganmore, Talisker, and Manachmore was the last distillery I worked at with them.
Oh, very good. And in terms of, I suppose, when did you start to take up your role? Because you're fairly recently in your current role now as distillery manager at Laphroaig.
Yeah, well, this is month 8. It's just absolutely flown by. It's been really nice coming home. I've been off Islay now for a long time. It's been about 13 years or so. So. Getting back in amongst some familiar faces, reconnecting with family, friends, it's just been fantastic. But it's been really, really interesting getting in amongst the nuts and bolts of Laphroaig now with almost a different pair of eyes. So having been through it as a tour guide before and always been curious about what happened in the recipes for mashing and distilling, but not really getting really close to it, to now having like over a decade experience under my belt, it's been really fun getting to know Laphroaig on a technical basis and working with the team to understand how it ticks.
And in terms of that, do you think your perspective on the distillery and maybe the wider distilling industry on Islay has changed from that time growing up on the island and working as a tour guide to now?
Oh, absolutely. I would say so. I mean, I see growing up on Islay, the distilleries themselves are villages. So like Laphroaig, Ardbeg, Bowmore, first and foremost, they're places. They're places where family and friends stay. It's places you go to school. So I didn't have a proper appreciation for the global reach of Laphroaig when I worked here initially. That changed moving up to Speyside, building my network, getting to know a few folk in the industry, and I found that people's eyes would light up when I mentioned that I work at Laphroaig. There just seems to be a natural following towards it. There's a great interest. It's got a really good strong sense of community, but it stretches even further than that. I couldn't believe it when I was living in Australia. So I was living in an island called Kangaroo Island off the south coast of South Australia, and pretty much every pub had Laphroaig behind the bar there, and even up in far north Queensland, country pubs up there, some typical spirits you might not find were you usually find weren't there, but Laphroaig 10 was sitting there at the back. So it was just a nice little reminder of home.
It's
No
incredible
matter where
the
you are.
reach. Sorry, yeah, no, it's incredible the reach of it. I remember, coming from Ireland, like before I was kind of aware of whiskey and working into it. Laphroaig was, as you say, in kind of most bars, but also people's perception of what Scotch is. To, even nowadays, I meet so many people who don't drink Scotch who just assume it's all peated, and I wonder how much of that is due to the prevalence of Laphroaig, as you say, on every back bar in every corner of the world.
Yeah, it's certainly got to have an influence. It's certainly got to have an influence, and I think it might partly play because of the intensity of Laphroaig and its popularity. I think it might play its hand in how some people tend to turn their nose up a wee bit at smoky whiskey because perhaps they've tried Laphroaig as their only one, and we tend to find complete lovers or people that don't like it. There's not much in between. There's not many people on the fence with Laphroaig.
Yeah. No, definitely. It'd be interesting to get further deeper into the production process that you've kind of already touched on there, Laphroaig. Before we do, in terms of move, did you move back to the island to take up this role 8 months ago?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I moved from Australia to come back to Islay. So I was working with a craft beverage accelerator in Australia, looking after a few distilleries down there and a brewery. So look, we're really enjoying our time down there, but the I don't know, life changed after we had my son Peter, and it was his first birthday party down in Adelaide, and I don't know, just felt a little bit hollow. Our friends and family weren't there. We had plenty of sunshine, but it just felt a wee bit cold. So we started to have a look at jobs back in Scotland, but we really agreed, like we'd find a way home within a couple of years. But believe it or not, the Laphroaig opportunity popped up within 2-3 weeks of that conversation that me and my fiance Joe had. And yeah, put my name in the hat, and lo and behold, a couple of months later, we were packing up our stuff and westering home, as they say.
Yeah, no, it's and like obviously Isla's an amazing place. I've been fortunate to visit there a couple of times, but you hear a lot now, and especially in recent years since COVID, whenever I've visited, a lot of people talk about kind of difficulty of maybe finding housing and getting settled in. Was that how challenging was that, or was that kind of handled by Laphroaig, or in terms of kind of getting a place on the island and settling back into that kind of island lifestyle, I suppose?
Yeah, Laphroaig supported us really well. The fantastic support again from Australia over to Islay. I think it was a bit of a shock though seeing the property prices on Islay. One of the pros and cons, one of the pros on the pros and cons list that we made of moving home was, oh yeah, we'll get home. The property prices will be way more affordable than the crazy prices we were seeing in Adelaide, and couldn't believe it. The first month we were here, there was two £500,000 sales of
On the island.
Aye, yeah.
Wow.
It's just, it's almost its own economy on Islay. So no, like we've got a home now in Port Ellen, and we're getting settled in, and yeah, just getting stuck into DIY. That's been the big jobs recently.
Yeah, marvelous. And in terms of outside of the DIY jobs, obviously your day-to-day job, could you maybe for people who listening might not know, or even people who know a lot about the brand, in terms of the kind of the production process, the style? I mean, the most obvious thing is obviously peated barley, but beyond that, in terms of how you source your barley, what kind of what the stills are like, what kind of your technical process of Laphroaig is, and maybe how it might compare to some of your previous roles you've listed.
Sure. Well, yeah, Laphroaig is obviously a smoky whiskey. But I think what is special for Laphroaig straight out the bat is we do our own malting on site, and so we've got complete control over the malting process for 20% of our overall recipe. And because of the scale that we're at, we actually buy in 80% of peated malt that we supplement with our own floor malted malt. So. That in itself is a fairly hands-on process. It's pretty manual. You're not going to find many examples of modern technology in our maltings, but what we celebrate with that is if you compare the batches of malt that we make, yield-wise, we're doing pretty good. We're north of 400 litres of a ton, which in industry standards that's looking pretty good. But from a complexity point of view, it's kind of the first stage for Laphroaig in building complexity. It's a very complex dram. Even when you look behind the smoke, there's a lot of layers of flavour, and the floor maltings is the first place for that. So the more kind of hands that are involved with this process and the less modern technology, there's a definite variation there in the homogeneity, as we call it, or how well developed the malt is. So that gives us a wider spectrum of flavors. So we'll have kind of more like spicy flavors with under modified malt and tropical notes with over modified malt and everything in between. So for me, it starts off strong. Like that, that's a really neat lever for us to have on site to influence the flavour. And obviously with that, obviously with the smoke. So we've our recipe is about 12 hours of cold smoking to dry out the green malt, and then about 24 hours of forced hot air drying after that. Now, that's where this smoky flavour comes in. And just to take a wee step back from that, the harvest itself of getting the peat in, what excites me so much about Laphroaig is and it hit me when I was in Australia, is how important terroir is for us. So when I was chatting with a lot of South Australian vineyard operators, they were wineries, they were really banging on hard about how the land can impact the flavour of their wine, depending on what grapes were grown and what land. And it really hit home. I was like, that's Laphroaig, that's Isla. And it's true. So specific peat bogs will provide you specific flavours. The chemical makeup of different peat bogs is very different. So our particular peat bog has peat that's we're deliberate in how we harvest it. We're careful and make sure that it's nice and thick and full of moisture and promotes that cold smoking that we're after. But it contains a fantastic array of soft and medicinal and earthy smoke, which is just what we're after. So yeah, you get the complexity of the floor maltings and the smoke coming together there nicely.
Mm-hmm.
So after that, that's when things become a little bit more familiar with the rest of the industry, I would say. So our mashing process is where the three ingredients of whiskey effectively meet. So we've got our water, which is nice soft water from the Kilbride Dam just up the hill there. That mixes with our malt, which is already pre-mixed with the 80% that we buy in. And also our yeast will come in at this point too. So we typically aim for the mashing process is like a flavour fork in the road, really. So how well you filter the mash and remove your sugary water from it, you can come out with quite a clear sugary water, or you can have a cloudy sugary water, or somewhere in between. Now, the clearer it is, typically the more fruit you're going to get, or the lighter flavours, the more cloudy it is. That's you on a path towards more heavy flavours. And in our case, we can hold on to a few more phenols in the process. So we strike a balance. So we're in the middle. So we aim for kind of halfway in between. So that kind of rings true when you have a lot of Laphroaigs. There's always a bit of a strong debate between fruit and smoke. There's a bit of a balance there between fruit and smoke, and the mash tun really exemplifies that. We're trying to get that balance. So yeah, from that, we actually do 2 mashes into a single washback. So we'll have in total 11.1 tons of malt will be ground up and mixed and mashed, and that will give us close to 53,000 litres of sugary water that we then add our yeast to. So after 3 days of fermentation, that'll be up to need enough 8% alcohol, and after that, well, we've done a pretty good job so far. So this wash will be full. This beer, this wash, it'll be full of alcohol, but plenty flavour. So our job now is to extract that alcohol, extract that flavour, and we've got 3 10,400 litre wash stills in our still house, which will do that first step for us. That'll bring the strength of the liquid up to about 23-25%, and that's our low wines, as we call it. And then the second distillation, that's our spirit distillation. So we've got 3 small spirit stills, 4,700 litres each, and 1 larger spirit still, which is double the size, 9,400. And that distillation is where the real fun begins. So we're not just distilling for getting strength, we're distilling to get strength, but also to extract the flavours that we want. And a really neat thing about Laphroaig's recipe for distilling is it's very different. It's a deeper cut. So typically you'd find that first step of the distillation where the alcohol's coming through very strong. We call it the head or the 4 shots. And typically you'll find in the rest of the industry that'll be 15 minutes, the shortest, half an hour typically. Laphroaig's 45 minutes. So we're not actually collecting the spirit at this point. We're recycling it. We're putting it into a faints tank. Now, when we start collecting the spirit, we're already a little bit deeper compared to the rest of the industry. But for smoky flavours and phenols, they're heavy compounds. They're going to be further down the strength as you collect the spirit. So we collect a little bit later, and we start collecting a bit later, sorry, and we also stop collecting a bit later. So our middle cut, our heart of the spirit, we keep collecting that all the way down to 60.5%. So it's pretty deep. A lot of other distilleries I've worked at have been about 64, 63.5, some 65. But yeah, that's the spirit in itself in a nutshell. That's we create complexity and balanced fruit and smoke, and we've got a cut point regime to try and garner as much of that smoke flavour as possible, but collect the fruit too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess you asked about similarities with other distilleries I've worked at. So Balvenie, I was the production manager at Balvenie for a while, about a year and a half, and they've got floor maltings as well. So yeah, it's just been nice to see the different approaches. So Balvenie does their heating with coal or anthracite. So it's imparting a lot of heat, but not a lot of smoke. But you do get that complexity that I was talking about earlier. So for me, it's been interesting to see that complexity with the smoke overlaid on top of that. And yeah, I think similarly, what else? It's only floor maltings I've worked at. I would say mashing wise, it's probably a similar sort of intensity of sugar as Balvenie as well. And the rest of the distilleries are all very different. Glenfiddich's vastly different. I was working at Glenfiddich's production manager for about four and a bit years, and they've got a big mix of technology. They've got direct fired stills on wash and spirit. They've got pretty long fermentations and a few other bits and bobs. But no, I think Laphroaig in its own right, even if you removed the smoke that we're very well known for, the recipe creates incredible complexity, and it's been fascinating getting to know it in more detail.
And yeah, that's really, really fascinating. I mean, in terms of go back to kind of the finding the balance and the mashing you were saying, how difficult is that in terms of over a longer period? I know you've only been there for a short period of time to find consistency in over time within that kind of distillation process. I was a big fan of your cast strength 10-year-olds that kind of were launched maybe 15 years ago or so, and they, particularly the kind of older ones, kind of like maybe batch 1 to 8, just over time, if you try them versus a batch 11 or 12, they're almost chalk and cheese. The earlier ones are much oilier in terms of texture. They're maybe a bit less fruity, maybe a bit more charcoaly in terms of the flavors. So when you're kind of going through what sounds like a fascinating process, is that a challenge in terms of consistency of flavor over time?
I think it can be, but I think if you take a step back as well and look at the different eras of Laphroaig in terms of decades, even scores of years, the one constant for Laphroaig has been the heart of the spirit, which is our peat, it's our terroir, it's our smoke. Now, Laphroaig has been through many different eras of different expansions over the last couple of 100 years, but each one has come with different technology and different slight tweaks on production methods. And if you try Laphroaig from, say, the distilled in the 70s and bottled in the 80s, you'll notice that DNA there. It's constant, that earthy, medicinal peat smoke. But there is a subtle difference in fruit. There's a little bit more fruit in there. You will find that in different decades there is subtle differences with changes in technology.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the same goes over more recent decades, and it's something that we've been exploring really closely to have a look at all of our previous recipes, have a look at what we think has worked really well, what we think could work better together in terms of mashing tweaks of the recipe with different fermentation tweaks of the recipe, even distillation too. So I think it's you can get control, really solid control in mashing, based on an awful lot of trial and error up front, but then you can automate certain things to repeat and get the same clarity every time. So that's something that we've got here. There's been a lot of trial and error to identify for us what's giving us that semi-cloudy water. Now, a lot of it comes down to wash pumping rate. So how fast are we pumping the liquid from the mash tun to the washback? Are we dragging through too many solids, or have we got it just right? Another really important part is at the start of the process of pumping from the mash tun to the washback. So the initial glug of sugary water that you've got, the wort, it's pretty cloudy because it hasn't had a chance to filter through the skin, the husks of the barley. So what we do is we actually recirculate that back in on top of the mash that's already there to give it a chance to filter through. And we've also got the positioning and the speed at which our rake inside the mash tun moves. So all of these things can be effectively automated and put into a recipe. And we just keep an eye on it, and we can report every morning as we catch up as a team to see how did last night go, how did yesterday go, any niggles, any issues. And if there's any issues with any of the pieces of equipment that are involved with that particular sequence, then we jump on it straight away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's fascinating the the number of aspects that can change, that can affect your ultimate output before it ever goes into a cask to get additional flavour. So it is. No, it's very interesting. Just in terms of the kind of the floor malting and the peated barley you're sourcing, I know. There's been a lot of we did a podcast episode last year with Nick Neen and focus on sustainability, and you get that a lot with a lot of these brands who are looking to kind of from all sorts of aspects of the process to be more sustainable. Do you think there's a challenge there in terms of maybe the how we source our barley and the use of peat going forward? Is it something that you're conscious of and as a brand?
Absolutely, it's fun. It's front of mind. It's front and center for us. I think there's, from a peat perspective, obviously it's our USP. It's our heart. It's our DNA. And I think there's three things that we have to be completely on top of and engaged with. And the first part is about extraction. So when we're taking peat from our peat bogs, we have to make sure it's responsible. So we spend an awful lot of time looking forward, planning, getting external support from environmental consultants to support us, and building a plan to make sure that what we're doing now is going to minimise the impact as far as we can on our peat bogs. And we've actually got a 25-year plan in place that maps out the steps that we need to take to ensure that we're extracting our peat responsibly. So, I mean, a couple of examples would be just ensuring that we're replacing the top layer of the turf and protecting the turf underneath. That plays a big part in stopping it drying out, and also making sure we're planning our harvesting every year, so we're protecting local nesting birds and adders and any other pieces, any other wildlife that we want to make sure we're not interrupting. So taking it out responsibly is a huge part for us. And second part is using it wisely. So cold smoking is what we're all about. So for us, that is really strict, solid monitoring in the kiln. We don't want any flames with this peat. We want as much smoke out of it as we possibly can. And the team do a fantastic job of that. And if we do find we've got a little bit of a dry patch, because it's a natural product. I mean, putting it through moisture analysis as it comes in is probably not feasible. So if we need to add a little bit more calf, which is like ground up peat with a bit of water, that's what we'll do, just to get the most out of the smoke. I guess the third part is, so we're responsible at taking it out. We're responsible and deliberately thinking about using it efficiently when we've got it. The third part's about restoration. So we've got a role to play here. We've got a brand that's built on over a couple of 100 years of celebrating the flavour that we get from distilling peated barley, peated malt. So we're actually playing a leading role in a fully funded restoration program called Peatland Water Sanctuary. So the aim with this is effectively to restore and revitalise various peat bogs around Scotland with progressive landowners that are currently, they've dried out for various reasons, or they've been damaged in the past. And our first ambition, is to restore as much peatland as we can that would offset what we're currently using by 2030. The second would be to double that by 2040. And we're making good progress on that, and we're collaborating with the rest of the industry too. And I think that's something that we have to do if we're going to truly offset what we're actually taking out, and continue as responsible advocates for the environment as well.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating, and no, it's brilliant to think of the amount of thought that goes into it. And obviously, I think we were doing a Laphroaig tasting a while back, and we were saying that the compared to other uses of peat, back in the day, maybe even powering electricity stations or someone's open fire, the volume that goes into kiln malting is obviously tiny than what would go into even just heating someone's average sized living room or something. So obviously it's different scales of use as well. And it would be a shame, because it's such a distinctive, amazing flavour and smell. So yeah, hopefully long may it continue in whiskey. The kind of, I suppose, on that, we were kind of one of your famous, the smoky flavors within your whiskey, and obviously the kind of iconic slogan of like dividing opinions since 1845 or whatever it is. It's very clever marketing, but it's also very true. Like obviously, some people do have that love-hate relationship with the peat. In terms of, but obviously if people are coming out to the distillery or buying the brand, they're probably already on board with the things. But being such an iconic brand and with such a kind of a sort of a familiar story, people think of Laphroaig, they think of peat. Are there other brands that you kind of look to for inspiration, that you kind of benchmark yourselves against, or kind of even not like sort of directly as competitors, but kind of think, oh, that's interesting what they're doing, maybe something we can incorporate? Is there any way you kind of think of yourselves in that regard?
Oh, that's a cracking question.
It was a long-winded question, but, but hopefully there's something there that you can answer.
Well, you've got me thinking. So yeah, it's maybe not specifically a brand. I do have one, but I'll touch on that in a wee moment. But where my head went initially there was my experience in Australia, and specifically the craft distillers that I was working with over there, and their attitude, like their hunger to prove themselves in an incredibly competitive market. And I used to go to the Australian Distillers Association conference, and they shared one year that at that conference that 5 years before that there was about 100 distilleries that were registered, and by that point it had like gone up fivefold. There was like 500 across the country. It was huge. So it's a burgeoning industry, and everyone's trying to prove themselves and get a step ahead. And I don't know, I got really hooked on the energy when I was down there of coming up with something new, coming up with something fresh, like breaking the boundaries, as they say. So I don't know, I think for me, I look to them with admiration, in that I think we can't rest on our laurels in Scotland, in Scotch whisky. We have the established brands, but we have to have a bit of that get up and go and hunger as well, because it's an incredibly competitive market. I mean, it's great. It's great to hear, for example, we've got potentially more volume opportunities coming with the Indian trade deal and such like, but we cannot get complacent. And I want to take a little bit of that energy into Laphroaig as we think about new product development in the future. And it's quite apt to be here talking to you about elements, because that is one part of that and one part of that journey. I think if I had to pick a brand straight up, I'd probably say Glenfiddich. I know I worked at Glenfiddich for a number of years. I was there when they were launching the experimental series. So I thought that series did a really good job of being true to their tradition, but stretching the brand in different directions of flavour in an interesting way. So yeah, I think that's a good example of that.
Brilliant. And in terms of it's a fantastic answer. That was to what was a very clunky question. But in terms of that, what you've said there, do you think that there's enough scope and space within the kind of sort of definition of Scotch or the technical file from the Scottish Whisky Association for brands, be it yourselves or be it any other kind of new players looking to push the boundary of whisky, enough room for them to maneuver within the definitions there?
I personally think that there is, and reason being, if you take a step back just from cask finishes and innovation related to the cask, there are so many tweaks and levers you can pull in malting recipes, mashing recipes, and distillation recipes themselves that I think can make a difference to the flavour, and how you manage your low wines and faints. They're all a function of themselves. So moving one thing alone, I think, can really shift the needle of flavour. But when you also think about combining different tweaks, I mean, statistically, you can make so many unique combinations of that, and I do believe that there's a lot to go at, especially with the shift that's happened with some of the more terroir focused brands, looking at barley terroir, looking at yeast innovation, different strains of yeast. So that's another layer of complexity over an already burgeoning list of changes you could make to your recipe. So I think there is. I think the challenge is with the scale of some of the brands in Scotland, that to test each individual one of those things, you're taking large distilleries out of their usual production plans to meet typical spirit for a maturation plan. So you have to be quite ruthless with what you try, which I think is one of the things that might hold back the innovation a wee bit. But no, I think there's plenty of scope for coming up with new flavours.
Yeah, no, definitely. And you think there's enough time? I mean, we've got an upcoming episode for anyone listening planned with Inchjourney Distillery in Fife, and they've done some really experimental mash bills using rye and different things, but everything has to be bottled as a single grain, even though it's it meets in every other aspect that what in America or in Ireland would be called a rye whiskey. So there's. Do you think, even though there's, people are obviously allowed to do all these sort of amazing experiments and experiment flavor, do you think we're able to communicate it with the consumer in the kind of have the tools to do that?
Yeah, it's certainly more challenging. I think it's certainly more challenging, but look, it's there to be challenged. If there's the opportunity and the energy behind it, then look, it's got to be challenged. Certainly, I think we do have to always tread carefully as well, as we're looking to go into markets with larger volume, such as India too, that we are protecting the global reputation of Scotch. So I understand why the law is there, but there has to be a happy medium for NPD as well.
Yeah. No, totally, and I know I totally agree. I think the fact that the way the laws are really have been really important to building the whiskey industry as to what it is for consistency and guaranteeing of quality. So no, it's definitely important. I was just that's curious, and that's a great answer on some of that. And so in terms of speaking of that, in terms of pushing boundaries and brands, you mentioned already that the real reason we're chatting here today, George, is to discuss this new release of Elements 3.0. Maybe before we dive into Elements 3.0, do you want to talk more broadly around Elements, the range, and 1 and 2 before we talk about the new one that's as we speak is available to buy from the whiskey shop?
Absolutely. So, look, my career so far, I would say 80% of it has been involved in new mixed spirit flavour. So working in different distilleries, creating different new mixed spirits, and going through the commissioning process for new distilleries and creating recipes for new mixed spirits. So it's something close to my heart. I really enjoy it. I really love it. I think there's a lot of scope in there, endless possibilities. Now, for this to be kind of my first chat as Laphroaig Distillery Manager with you, I'm just loving it, because it's in that very same vein. It's what we've done here with the Elements range is we've come up with different tweaks of the mashing or pre-maturation recipes effectively. So far we've done malting, mashing, and fermentation, but we've made tweaks before the maturation and kept the maturation very, very standard. So American oak barrels, which is normally what Laphroaig is known for. So we're effectively inviting our friends, our consumers, even newcomers too, if they want to try something a little bit different that might not be the classic Laphroaig, to kind of come within the confines of the walls of the distillery, come into the nuts and bolts, see what we can do in the distillery. Our packaging is effectively open book. We're telling you who mashed it. We're telling you the specific variety of barley, the clarity of the wort, pretty much everything. So it's a range that's there to give us the opportunity to celebrate the flavours and different methods of stretching the classic Laphroaig flavour in different directions than purely just doing a cask finish. So on that note, Elements 1. So Elements 1, it's effectively, it's 3 for 1. But what we've aimed for with the Elements 1 is really trying to test the balance of fruit and smoke. Mind I was touching on that a little bit earlier. So the tweaks that we've made is we've done a whole mash bill of Laphroaig 100% floor malting. So rather than having a 20% mash bill where you've got that spectrum of spice to tropical fruit in your mash bill, 100% of the mash bill has got that spectrum in it. So that's our first sort of introduction of ramping up the fruit. Secondly, what we've done is we've played around with the size of the mash bill too. So typically we would do an 11-ton mash, 11 tons overall into a wash back over 2 mashes. And we've changed that a bit and gone for one whole large 8.5-ton mash. So the difference with that is we've seen the intensity of the sugar in that sugary water drop a touch. So it's a lower OG, and that presents an environment for the yeast to make a more fruity spirit. A more fruity wash. Now, the last thing that we've done was that fork in the road that I mentioned earlier on about having the chance to make cloudy wort, clear wort, somewhere in between. At the time, the recipe was typically moving just for cloudy, and we have included some mashes of semi-cloudy as well. So that's introducing some fruit. But having that cloudiness in there is also important, because the cloudier it is, the more of the smoke that we're going to pull through with it as well. So Elements 1 is, it's got that classic Laphroaig solid base of earthy smoke. It's medicinal, but it's got a cranked up note of really nice, sharp smoked pineapple. You've got your classic dry oak on the finish, and it's got a touch of spice too. You know, it's got that touch of spice from the under-modified malt that's come through in that 100% mash bill. So I would say I would summarize it as smoked pineapples with a background of oak. You know, it's got a really lovely approach to it. So number 2 is, again, we've moved on a little bit just to focus on one thing now, and we've moved on from the mash tun. So at the time, the standard fermentation times for Laphroaig were 55 hours. And the really neat thing about fermentation is the first 55 hours really is all just fermentation, turning the sugars into alcohol and flavour compounds. But any hour after that is just contributing more and more to flavour and complexity. There really isn't much more alcohol getting created at that point. Mm-hmm. So we've tried ever increasing lengths of fermentation. We've taken 55 hours, which is our normal, and we've taken 6 washbacks at ever increasing fermentation times all the way up to 115 hours. And we've then blended all that together, and what results is a really wide spectrum of fruity flavours. And in the glass, it just for me pops out. It's not tropical this time. It pops out as really zesty apple. So it's like peat smoked toffee apple is effectively how I would describe it, but with that underlying oak. And this just fascinates me, because like the casks are the same. You know, it's very similar. Post still, everything's very similar. And we're seeing such a difference just with tweaks in the mash tun, the fermentation. So that's 1 and 2. I wish we had the dram here and we can actually
well, you're making
prove the chat. I'm getting a bit thirsty myself, but
no, that's brilliant. I think it's fascinating. I don't know if this is apocryphal,
in terms of what you were saying about the fermentation times. Years ago, I read or I was told that the vast majority of distilleries in Scotland base their fermentation times just off shift patterns for the staff as to who was available to, once it obviously beyond the need to ferment the initial bit to convert the alcohol, that emptying times were mainly based on those shift patterns. So hearing you describe how the flavours change there and the level of thought and detail that's gone into those first two releases, it's fascinating, kind of chiming with what we said about sort of innovation and consistency earlier on, about how our kind of understanding and the way we think about these things has changed. In terms of the new one, so that's out now at the Whisky Shop, what can you tell us a bit more about number 3? And is this going to be the last in the series, or is there more planned?
Well, it won't be the last in the series. I can certainly tell you that now. Yep. So, yeah, Elements 3. We've left mashing alone. We've left fermentation alone. We've left distillation alone. So we've focused purely on the malting. And do you know what? We've even left the malting side of it alone. It's purely in the kiln. Now, the big change that we've made here is we've added on another layer of smoke, but different smoke. Now, you'll know I mentioned earlier we've got that 12 hours of cold smoking. That's our base. That's our foundation for our Laphroaig phenols. And this particular batch that we did, we didn't just have that period of 12-hour cold smoking. We had a subsequent extended period of hot peat smoking, and it was much longer. It was much hotter, and that's something that we typically just do not have at Laphroaig. We're nice and cold smoke. The smoke almost looks blue. It's billowing out that much, and you can actually put your hand in above the peat fire, and it feels as cold as the air around you. But no, this is much different. We've cranked up the heat, and there's two really key differences that are happening now. Some research has been done recently by the Scotch Whisky Research Institute, which is just fantastic timing. And we've seen that with different temperatures coming from the peat, like with different kiln temperatures, what proportion of different phenols that the barley absorbs changes. And it tends to pick up less of the medicinal smoke that we're used to. So it's more of a bonfire, a charcoal, wood-based. It's perceived as more of a wood-based smoke that we're getting. So we've got the home base. We've got the standard Laphroaig layer of medicinal smoke, but we've also put this other layer of smoke in there as well. And just to finish it off, the fact it's that hot, we effectively get a layer of malt in the bed which has been roasted or toasted too. So it's almost like chocolate malt in there. Like
you might use in this stout beer or something.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got that as part of the mash bill too. So you've got the flavors that come with the specialty malt, like whether it's like chocolate, bitter chocolate, coffee, like caramel toffee. You've got that in the mix with another different layer of smoke, as well as the typical medicinal earthy smoke that we've got. So look, it's a different beast. It's got more of a grip to it in the palate, and I just can't wait to share a dram with folk and get people's feedback. Because, like I say, this isn't the last in the series, so it can certainly help direct us in different ways.
Mm-hmm. No, it really sounds amazing. You're really selling it, and it makes, even though obviously you're saying that the recent research is kind of backed up while you were talking about the heat levels, but it also instinctively makes sense. Like even if you're making overnight oats or cooking your porridge, the amount of heat you're applying to it is going to change the way it interacts with the kind of liquid and moisture around it that is kind of gathered through germination. So instinctively that really makes sense to me, and it really sounds fascinating. We've got, for anyone listening, depending the time you're listening to this, so that there's obviously lots of tastings coming up in different stores around England and Scotland around this release, and we'll have a digital drams sampling too. So I haven't yet tasted this, George, but I'm looking forward to doing it very soon. It does sound like an exceptional dram. So do you know already? I presume, just given the nature of what's involved in these processes, you've already got a fair idea what the future elements are going to look like. Is there any hints you can give us?
Well, this is one of those times that I can kind of say ignorance is bliss, because I haven't got to that bit yet. I'm 8 months in, so not much I can say on that. But let's just say, maybe not for this particular range of elements, but there's plenty of tweaking that I've been involved in since I started here in the last 8 months. Can't say too much.
Yeah, fair enough. But in terms of any of those tweaks, do you ever see something like that you end up incorporating into an experimental range like this being you kind of taken in and kind of applied to your core, or is that are you trying to stay very distinct and consistent with the kind of classic core that everyone's familiar with?
Yeah, I think at the moment I don't see the core being influenced uh, too much at all. But what I will say is I think that each of these expressions that we do, we learn more about Laphroaig ourselves with each and every one, and that can only help influence us for the future,
Hmm.
any decisions that we make. Um, I mean, we've been through it a couple of times before with looking at expanding, and with that, there's all sorts of excitement there with different technologies and understanding how different experiments and also technology influence Laphroaig's flavour can really help set us up for success for things like that.
Hmm. No, that's fascinating. A great answer. I suppose this. I'm kind of conscious of the amount of time you've given us, so I really appreciate that, George. There's four questions we ask everyone who goes on these episodes. I'm going to come to them in a second. I have one extra bonus question for you. In terms of your new role now at Laphroaig, what do you think are the kind of the ideal traits or aspects to being a distillery manager that one should have that you think you bring to the role, or you would give advice to maybe a young person getting into the industry looking to follow your path?
Oh, um, I think you need to be absolutely clear on and on top of what it takes to run a legal and compliant distillery. Uh, we're working with a lot of dangerous liquids here. There's a lot of risks on site to manage. So you need to be really comfortable and really clear and have good training to understand what it is you're responsible for, and make sure you've got good routines and structures in place to give you the confidence that you've got it all covered. And I think that's just your entry to the game. You have to have that covered. And for me, after that, I think you have to put the hours in. You really do have to put the hours in to get to know your team and your process, your numbers, and go on shift, get stuck in, roll your sleeves up, get involved in the problems that everybody faces every day, and learn and get a feel for the rhythm of the distillery. And I think once you put those hours in, you've got there, you've got a few scars. I think it's all about time management. And when you know your people really well, you've been through a few problem solving situations with everybody, you get a sense for when to be hands on and hands off as a leader. And I think that's key for using your time properly. And last but not least, I think you have to enjoy a challenge. You're going to get thrown an awful lot of unexpected situations, but you've got to tackle it head on and keep a smile on your face and have a positive influence on people as you go about it. And it doesn't help to have a taste for the liquid too. If you enjoy the dram you're making, I think that just has a positive effect as well all round.
No, very good. That's an excellent answer. Yeah, I can see how kind of the problem solving those challenges would be key to it. And in terms of just a little additional question to that, what size is your team there? Or apologies if you said this at the start of the call.
Yeah, in the production side, we've got 28 people. So we've got a malting team, mashing, distilling, and warehousing, and everybody in the office too. And if you include the visitor centre team, it takes us up to 40. So
Wow.
we've got
Yeah,
a yeah,
big
fairly,
employer on the island.
fairly busy old site.
Yeah, definitely. Marvelous. So here's the kind of the questions that we ask every guest. So first off, your ideal food pairing with the Laphroaig.
Now, this is purely because I used to do this when I was a tour guide. I used to do food pairing tastings, and it's probably the only time I'll ever eat this, but it's Roquefort cheese with Laphroaig 10-year-old.
Nice.
It
I can see that working. Yeah.
it works so well. The salt, the cream, the smoke. It's cracking.
Hmm. No, that's a great answer. And your favorite kind of cocktail serve with the Laphroaig.
My better half will call me boring for this, but I like a highball.
Yeah.
Just Laphroaig, sparkling water, bit of ice. It's good if you're on a diet too. Try to look
That's
after
true.
yourself a wee bit. Yep.
No, very good. And is there a specific genre of music or artist you would listen to or while drinking a Laphroaig or that Laphroaig makes you think of?
I think it depends on Laphroaig, to be honest. Look, the something more easygoing, like a 10-year-old. Like I like a bit of instrumental trad music, so something nice and chilled, like Aurora, Elephant Sessions, Session A9. If we crank it up a bit to cask strength, might even go to Skippinish, a good band from the West Coast, Battersea Boys, maybe even a wee bit of deep house as well, if we're really getting into some stronger batches.
Yeah, no, excellent. I can see all of them working. That's a good answer. What's your favourite dram, non-Laphroaig dram?
Oh, okay. So one that you could buy off the shelf. I absolutely love the Balvenie 17-year-old Doublewood. That is just a dynamite dram. Really, really good. I do prefer smoky whiskey, but for a space like that, for me was the pinnacle. Although I will say, like, if there's no real rules to this, I think my absolute favourite liquid that I have tried recently was, before I got to Laphroaig, obviously, there was a specific Oloroso sherry butt in the warehouse at Kangaroo Island Distillery that was only a couple of years old, and it was absolutely delicious, and I still think about it.
Nice. I like how it's like a younger whiskey. So no, that's good. Another excellent answer. So finally, your first memory of drinking whiskey or getting into whiskey.
My first memory was quite a shocker. My best friend, we both lived in Portellan at the time, and his father had a bottle of Ardbeg Still Young, and it would have been an Ardbeg that was less than 10 years old, because it was the release that they had as they were going through the maturation up to their standard 10 release after they reopened. And so that was the first whiskey I ever drank, and it was probably one of the most smoky whiskies you can possibly get your hands on, and it just blew my head off. I just wasn't ready for it. So that was me and him getting stuck into that at the tender age of 18. But no, a year later I was at Laphroaig and found a taste for it.
Marvelous. No, that's excellent. Well, listen, George, thank you so much for your time. It's been great chatting to you. For anyone listening, sorry to repeat myself here, but the Elements 3 is available now, so do go and pick up a bottle, or if one of those, if you're listening to before any of those tastings or digital drams are taking place, do kind of jump on the call, because it's great liquid and you get to try some of the core range as well, which is never a bad thing. So thank you so much, George, for your time this afternoon.
Cheers for having me, Luke.
Yeah, and we'll hopefully talk to you soon. Maybe I'll catch you in person on Isla someday. And if you're ever down our neck of the woods, let us know.
I'll have a dram waiting for you, don't you worry.
Brilliant. Cheers, man.
Cheers, Luke.